The floor is cold. I have been sitting here for 20 minutes and I still cannot move. The pregnancy test is on the sink, 2 lines bold as a confession, and on my wrist, this bracelet. This thin gold bracelet with its unusual clasp that I have not worn in 5 years, that I swore I would never touch again, that somehow found its way back to me in the worst possible way. I cannot look at it. The traffic outside sounds like the world continuing on without my permission. Somewhere in this city, people are eating dinner, arguing about nothing, falling asleep in front of televisions, and I am on this bathroom floor trying to remember how to breathe. My name is Melody, and tonight, the secret I have been carrying for months just grew a heartbeat, and it does not belong to my husband. I need you to understand how I got here, not the surface version, the real one, the version that starts with joy and ends on a bathroom floor with shaking hands and a truth so heavy it has pinned me to the ground. Because nothing about this began in darkness. It began in the most beautiful light I have ever stood in. It began on my wedding day. 5 years ago, the church was full of everything good. Sunlight through stained glass, the smell of fresh flowers, women in bright colors crying happy tears from the third pew. Peter was standing at the altar, and when he saw me come through those doors, he pressed his fist against his mouth like a man trying to hold himself together. That one image, my husband fighting tears at the sight of me, I held it like a shield for years. I thought love like that was fireproof. I was so foolish. It was 20 minutes before the ceremony when Harry found me in the corridor, Peter's best friend since childhood, the best man, the man every woman at that wedding was stealing glances at, tall, composed, with a smile that arrived slowly, like he was deciding whether you were worth it. He pulled me aside and looked at me the way you look at something you have already decided belongs to you. "You're making a mistake," he said. Quiet, calm, like he was telling the weather. "You deserve better than what Peter can give you. I just need you to know that. And if you ever change your mind..." He paused, and the pause was worse than the words, worse than anything that followed it. "I'll be waiting." My heart did something strange in that moment. Not attraction, not temptation, something colder. The feeling you get when you realize the locked door you walked past every day was never actually locked. I did not answer him. I told myself it was nerves, that some men cannot watch the woman they wanted choose someone else and simply be gracious about it. I told myself he would move on. Then he reached out and pressed something into my hand. A bracelet, thin gold with a small, unusual clasp, the kind you remember because it looks like nothing else. I stared at it. He was already walking away, straightening his jacket, becoming again the charming best man that everyone loved. Nobody saw what just happened. Nobody saw what he pressed into my hand or what his eyes said when he did it. I hid it in the back of a drawer that same night. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself I would throw it away. I never did. And I have asked myself 1,000 times since why I kept it. Maybe some part of me already knew. Maybe we always know, and we just choose the more comfortable lie. Every snake looks harmless before someone gets bitten. What I did not know, what I could not have known standing there in my wedding dress with organ music rising behind me and my whole future waiting at the altar, was that Harry was not a man who walked away from things he wanted. He was a man who waited, a man who planned, a man who was already, on the day I married his best friend, building a trap I could not yet see. I walked back down that corridor. I took Peter's hand at the altar. I said my vows, looking into the eyes of the man I loved with everything I had. And somewhere behind me, in the 3rd row, Harry watched, patient, certain, smiling at all the right moments, already waiting for the season to change. 5 years passed. 5 years of building something real, a home, a partnership, a life that had texture and warmth, and the particular comfort of knowing someone so well you can read their breathing in the dark. Peter was not a perfect man, but he was a present one, and in a world full of men who disappear into themselves, that presence felt like everything. We had one silence between us, one wound that neither of us named out loud, though we both felt it every month without fail, the absence of a child. 5 years of praying, of hoping, of lying awake doing the quiet mathematics of time and impossibility. 5 years of Melody calculating and Peter watching her calculate and both of us pretending we were not keeping score. The doctors had never said impossible, just unlikely. I held on to that word like a lifeline. Unlikely meant still possible. Unlikely meant keep praying. Unlikely meant the answer was not no, it was not yet. I did not know then that Peter already knew the answer, that he had known it before the wedding, that every prayer I offered in that quiet, that every month of hope and grief and renewed hope, he had watched it all knowing, and it said nothing, because the truth was a door he was too afraid to open. But I did not know that yet. What I did know was that we were trying. What I did know was that we loved each other. What I did know was that the business was growing and the life we were building together had a shape I was proud of and a future I believed in. And then the night came that took it all of it. The call came at 11:47 at night. I remember the exact time because I looked at my phone when it rang and thought, who calls this late with good news? Nobody. Nobody ever does. By the time we got there, half the market was already gone. Our section was the worst. I stood on the pavement in my house slippers, watching 5 years of sacrifice turn into smoke and orange light, that terrible, beautiful, destroying orange light. And Peter stood beside me and did not make a single sound. Not one. That silence was the first thing that frightened me. More than the flames, more than the crowd gathering on the pavement with their phones raised, more than the smell of everything we owned burning into nothing. Peter was a man who always had words for comfort, for solutions, for the particular brand of stubborn optimism that had carried us through every difficulty before this one. That night, he had nothing. The fire took his words along with everything else. And in the weeks that followed, I watched the man I loved disappear into a silence so complete it had its own weight, its own temperature. He sat at the kitchen table and stared at fixed points on the wall. He stopped answering his phone. He stopped eating properly. He stopped being present in the way that had always been his greatest gift to me, that steady, warm, reliable presence that made a room feel safer just by existing in it. The debt collectors arrived before the ash had even cooled. They were not gentle about it. One of them stood outside our building and said Peter's name loud enough for the neighbors to open their windows, a deliberate, calculated cruelty designed to strip the last shreds of dignity from a man already on his knees. Peter sat at the kitchen table during that visit and stared at a point on the wall, and I watched something leave his eyes that I had never seen absent before. Hope, just gone. I tried everything I knew how to try. I kept the house running on almost nothing. I found small income where I could, lessons, errands, anything. I held us together with both hands and smiled when I did not feel like smiling and told myself this was temporary, that we would find a way, that the man I married was still in there somewhere behind all that silence. And one evening, I told him quietly that maybe we should see a doctor. About the baby we had been praying for? 5 years and nothing? I thought maybe in the middle of all this ruin, having something to hope for together might pull him back to me, might remind him that there was still a future worth rebuilding for. Peter went completely still. Not sad, not emotional, Still in the way a person goes still when they are deciding something very quickly in a place you cannot see. His eyes went somewhere private. Then he cleared his throat and asked if I had called the insurance company back yet. The subject was changed so smoothly I almost believed it was accidental. I noticed. I told myself it was grief, that he could not think about a baby when we could not afford groceries. I filed it away in the part of me that was already carrying too much to examine anything carefully. I was right about the grief. I was catastrophically wrong about what he was hiding.
3 days after that conversation, Peter came home and found me sitting at the table not eating again, the plate in front of me untouched, the food cold, my hands flat on the table like I was trying to feel something solid. He did not say a word. He went to the kitchen. I heard him moving quietly in there, the soft sounds of someone being careful not to disturb the particular quality of silence I was living inside. He came back with a plate of the one thing that has always felt like home to me, set it beside mine, turned off the overhead light, and sat down next to me in the dark. He did not ask me to talk. He did not offer solutions or prayers or the empty optimism of a man trying to fix something he could not fix. He just stayed. I ate. I still cannot fully explain why that was the thing that finally made me eat. Not encouragement, not logic, just my husband sitting beside me in the dark, choosing to stay, choosing to be present in my silence the way he had always been present in my joy. I loved him so much in that moment it felt like physical pain. I need you to hold that image, that dark kitchen, that plate of food, that man sitting beside me without asking for anything in return. Hold it, because everything that comes next is going to test how much you remember it. We were drowning, both of us, and I had knocked on every door I could find. I went to our friends first, the couple who had eaten at our table 100 times, who called Peter a brother, who said, "Anything you need, we are here." I sat in their living room and told them the truth, the debt, the collectors, the number. The wife looked at the husband. The husband cleared his throat and said things were tight right now, that they would pray for us. I went to our community group. I went to our church, spoke to the pastor privately. He said the benevolence fund had been stretched lately, several families in need. He would see what he could do. He never called back. Door after door after door. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that Harry had arrived at every single one of those doors before me. A quiet word here, a gentle doubt planted there. Harry borrowed more than people know. I'm not sure they'll recover. I would be careful. Nothing loud enough to be called a lie, just enough friction to make people hesitate, just enough to ensure that by the time I came knocking, every hand that might have reached for mine had already quietly withdrawn. The spider doesn't trap the fly by force, it just makes sure the web is already there. I did not know I was already inside it. That was when my phone rang. Harry. He had heard what happened. He wanted to help. He had a solution, private, clean, something that would clear everything without bruising Peter's pride. He just needed to speak to me, alone. I should have hung up. Do you think a secret can ever save a marriage? I genuinely want to know what you think. Drop your answer in the comments right now, because what I decided next changed everything. Subscribe and hit that bell. You cannot afford to miss what comes next. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened in that office. I tried everywhere else first. I want that on record, not to excuse what I did, because there is no excuse for what I did, but because you need to understand the full shape of what was done to me before you decide how you feel about what I chose. I did not walk into Harry's trap. I was carried there, door by door, refusal by refusal, until the only door left open was his. The office was cold. Not the temperature, though it was cool enough to feel deliberate. The feeling. Everything expensive, everything arranged. The kind of room that tells you immediately that the person who owns it makes calculated decisions and has never once apologized for any of them. Harry stood when I walked in, which somehow made it worse, the courtesy of a predator who has already won. He did not insult me by being implicit. He looked at me across that desk and said it plainly: the amount, the timeline, the complete erasure of everything Peter owed, clean slate. Peter would never know where the money came from, his pride would survive, his recovery could begin immediately. All Harry wanted in return was me. He said it calmly, the way you state a transaction, the way you quote a price. I sat with it for a long moment in that cold, expensive room. I thought about Peter at the kitchen table, the light gone from his eyes, the debt collector saying his name on the street, every closed door, every unanswered prayer. And I made a decision I cannot unknow. I told myself it was sacrifice. I told myself that what Peter did not know could not break him. I told myself I was strong enough to carry this alone, that I could do this terrible thing and pack it so deep inside myself it would never surface, that love could function as a container for shame if you sealed it tightly enough. I told myself a lot of things in that office. Every single one of them was a lie. I stood up. I smoothed my clothes. I looked at Harry one last time, at the satisfaction he was working very hard to keep off his face, at the patience of a man who has been waiting 5 years for a particular door to open and has just heard the lock turn, and I walked out into the afternoon light feeling like a woman already disappearing. The money arrived in Peter's account that same evening. He called me from the kitchen, voice cracked with relief, asking if I had seen it, asking who could have done this, saying God is faithful, saying we are going to be okay, saying his voice with such raw gratitude that I had to press my back against the bathroom wall and close my eyes. I said yes. I said thank God. I said we are going to be okay. I stood in that bathroom and made my voice do the right things and felt something inside me go very, very quiet. Not peace. The silence of a door closing. And Harry, in that cold office with the expensive furniture and the calculated light, picked up his phone and smiled, because he knew something I had not yet fully understood. This was never going to end with the debt. The cruelest thing about carrying a secret is that life keeps moving around you like nothing happened. Peter woke up the morning after the money arrived, and something had returned to his eyes. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. Enough to make him eat a full meal. Enough to laugh at something on television. Enough to reach for my hand in the night the way he used to, before the fire took everything, including the version of him that felt entitled to joy. I let him hold my hand. I stared at the ceiling and let him hold my hand and told myself, this is why. This, right here, this is what I paid for. The months that followed were the loneliest of my life, and I was never once alone. Peter rebuilt. Slowly, carefully, the way a man rebuilds when he has been genuinely broken and does not fully trust the ground beneath him anymore. He was grateful in a way that was almost unbearable to witness. He thanked God every morning with a sincerity that made my chest ache. He blessed Harry's name at the dinner table. That man showed up for us when nobody else did. That man is a true friend. And I would reach for my water glass and take a long, slow sip and feel the bitterness of it coat my throat like something physical. The secret lived everywhere in me. In the way I flinched when Harry's name appeared on Peter's phone, in the way I left the room during their calls claiming I needed air, needed water, needed anything that put a wall between me and the sound of that voice coming through the speaker, warm, brotherly, utterly in control, in the way I stopped looking at myself in mirrors, not out of vanity, because the woman looking back knew things I was not ready to say out loud. The house had a hollow sound in those months that I do not know how to describe to someone who has not lived inside a secret. It was not silence, exactly. Peter was there, the television was on, meals were cooked and eaten. Ordinary life continued in its ordinary rhythms. But underneath all of it, beneath every conversation and every shared meal and every night lying beside my husband in the dark, there was this hollow resonance, like a room with nothing on the walls, like a drum with something wrong at its center. I started hearing Harry's voice when he was not there. Not loudly, not in the way that would have frightened me into action, just a whisper at the edge of perception. When Peter mentioned his name, I would hear it a half second before the word arrived, my nervous system anticipating the threat before my mind caught up. When the phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, my stomach would drop before I even saw the screen. My body had learned Harry before my mind was willing to admit what that meant. I was not free. I had never been free. I had simply traded one kind of captivity for another, and the new one had no visible walls, just the hollow sound of a house where the woman inside it was slowly disappearing, and nobody could see it happening because she was so very, very good at making her face do the right things.
It was an ordinary Tuesday when the world almost ended early. I was in the bedroom when I heard him pick it up. I did not even know it had fallen. The receipt, folded twice from a restaurant across the city on an afternoon I had told Peter I was visiting a friend. I heard the silence first, that particular quality of silence that has weight in it, that means someone has found something and is deciding how to hold it. Then he called my name. Every cell in my body went cold. I walked out. He was standing by my bag, receipt in hand, reading it with the careful attention of a man who is trying very hard to appear casual. He looked up. "What's this?" 1 second. I had 1 second, and something in me, something I did not know I owned, some survival mechanism I had been building in the dark without realizing it, assembled the answer before I had consciously formed it. "That's Tolu's," I said, level, steady. "She's planning a surprise dinner for her husband's birthday. Asked me to check out the venue. I kept the receipt so she could pay me back." Peter looked at me. I held his gaze and did not blink and did not breathe, and somewhere deep inside me, something that had been soft and alive quietly turned into something else, something harder, something I did not fully recognize and was not sure I wanted to. He put the receipt down. "Okay," he said, and went back to the kitchen. I stood in that hallway for a long time after he left. The shaking started after, not during, not while I needed to be still, but after, in the private aftermath of the crisis, when my body finally allowed itself to respond. My hands were trembling, my legs felt uncertain beneath me. I pressed my back against the wall and stayed there until the trembling passed and left behind something worse than fear. Clarity. I had looked at the man I loved, and I had lied to his face, and I had done it without hesitation, without flinching, without the slightest tremor in my voice that might have given me away. And the thing that terrified me most was not that I had almost been caught. It was how natural it had felt, how quickly the lie had formed, how smoothly it had left my mouth, how completely I had become someone capable of that fluency. I did not recognize the woman who had just spoken. And standing in that hallway with my hands finally still and my face finally private, I understood something I had been refusing to understand for months. You can bury a lie, but you cannot stop it from growing. It had already grown so deep inside me, I could not find where it ended and I began.
The debt was cleared in full by the end of that month. I drove to Harry's office without telling anyone where I was going. I sat across that desk, that cold, expensive desk in that cold, deliberate room, and I told him it was over. No more. Done. Finished. I said it the way you say something you have rehearsed so many times it has lost all emotional content and become just shape and sound and absolute finality. Harry leaned back in his chair. He looked at me for a long moment, not angry, not surprised, with the particular patience of a man who has never once believed this conversation was going to go the way I thought it was. Then he smiled. "Melody," he said quietly, "you don't get to end this." He let that land, let the air around those words sit undisturbed. "I do." I stood up. I looked at him one last time. I left. I drove home telling myself it was over, that the debt was gone, the arrangement was finished, that Harry could threaten all he wanted, but I had made my decision and I was done, and there was nothing left he could do to me that was worse than what I had already done to myself. I was wrong about that. I was so catastrophically, completely wrong. The first message came at 12:43 in the morning. No words, just a photograph. Of me, leaving a grocery store, taken from a distance without my knowledge, no caption, no threat, just proof. I see you. I am close. You do not get to forget I exist. I deleted it and lay in the dark next to Peter and did not sleep. The second week, he appeared at my workplace, nodding at me from across the room at a function I had not told him I was attending, wearing a smile that was entirely for the other people in the room, warm and easy and belonging to a man with nothing to hide. To everyone else, he was charming, wonderful, Peter's loyal friend. To me, that smile said, "There is no room you can walk into that I cannot follow you into." He came to our church, sat 3 rows back, shook Peter's hand afterward in the courtyard, while I stood beside my husband and smiled and smiled and smiled until my face ached from the effort of it. The messages escalated. Midnight, 1 in the morning, 2. Some were threats, quiet, specific, devastating. He had details about Peter's previous business dealings that could be twisted. He knew names, he knew figures. He said if I did not respond, he would call Peter himself and tell him everything, and the version he would tell would be one where I had come to him willingly, repeatedly, hungrily, a version Peter would have no evidence to disprove.
Peter nearly found the messages twice. The first time I heard him pick up my phone from the counter, a completely ordinary thing, he was just checking the time, and I crossed the room in 4 steps and took it from his hand with a laugh about a surprise I was planning. He accepted it without question, and I went to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub and breathed until my hands stopped shaking. The second time was worse. He saw a notification flash across my screen before I could turn it over. He asked who was messaging me so late. "Work group chat," I said. No sense of boundaries. "I need to mute it." He laughed and said, "Yes, mute it." I nodded and muted Harry's number and lay there knowing it changed nothing. The messages still came. I had just stopped seeing them in real time. But Harry was not finished constructing his leverage. Because threatening to tell Peter about the affair was one weapon, and Peter knowing, as I would later discover, had already blunted it. What Harry had been building quietly, underneath all the midnight messages and the parking lot appearances, was something far more dangerous. He had documents. I did not know this yet. I found out later, much later, in the rubble of everything, that Harry had spent those months carefully assembling a set of forged financial records, papers that tied Peter's business, the insurance claim from the fire, and a series of transactions to something that looked very much like fraud. The kind of paperwork that placed in the right hands would not just end a marriage, it would end a man. Harry was not just threatening to destroy our relationship, he was holding a detonator to Peter's entire future. Some traps don't look like traps until the door has already closed behind you. Mine had closed on my wedding day. I just hadn't known how many locks were on the other side.
The confrontation happened in a parking lot on a Thursday afternoon. I had asked him to meet me, neutral ground, public enough that he would have to keep his voice down. I had rehearsed what I was going to say until the words had no feeling left in them, just intention. I was going to be clear. I was going to be final. I was going to end this with the same decisiveness I had deployed at his desk, and this time I was not going to leave room for a smile. I told him, clearly, finally, with every wall I had left standing, it was over. It had been over. Nothing he threatened could change that, and I was prepared to face whatever consequences he unleashed because the weight of the secret was heavier than the weight of the exposure, and I could not carry it any longer. Harry was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at me, not with anger, not with the calculation I had braced for, with something so much more disturbing than either. Something genuine, something that had been living under all the control and the strategy for 5 years and was now sitting unguarded on his face. "He never deserved you," he said, soft, almost tender. "I have known that since the day I met you both. I waited. I gave you time to see it yourself." He paused, "And you never did." He believed it. Every word. I could see it. The complete, catastrophic sincerity of a man who had built an entire cathedral of delusion around this obsession. In his mind, he was not the villain of this story. He was the man destiny had chosen for me, who had been patient while I made my mistake, who had finally found the circumstances to correct what had always been wrong. I have never been more frightened of another human being in my life. Not because he was angry, because he was certain. I found the bracelet on a Thursday. I came home to an empty house. Peter was working late, and it was sitting in the center of the kitchen table. The thin gold bracelet with the unusual clasp, the one from my wedding day, the one I had hidden in the back of a drawer 5 years ago and told myself meant nothing. He had been inside my home. I stood in the doorway and looked at that bracelet and felt the floor shift beneath me. No note, no message. He did not need one. The bracelet said everything. I was here before the marriage. I have been here the whole time. There is no part of your life I cannot reach. I stood there for a long time. Then I picked it up and turned it over in my hands and felt the full, crushing weight of what it meant. Not just as a threat, but as a message about time. Harry had been patient for 5 years. He had watched and waited and engineered and endured, and he was telling me with this one small object placed in the center of my kitchen table that he was prepared to be patient for 5 more. I put it on my wrist, not because I wanted to, because I needed to feel the weight of it, because I had been carrying invisible things for so long that I needed something physical to remind me that the weight was real, that I was not imagining the prison I was living inside. It sat on my wrist like something that had always belonged there. That was what frightened me most. I called my doctor the next morning. Not about Harry. About something else entirely, something I had been ignoring for weeks because I had no room left inside me for any more information, any more truth, any more of anything arriving uninvited and changing the shape of the life I was barely managing to hold together. The test results confirmed what I had already suspected, but refused to name. I sat in the car outside the clinic for 40 minutes before I could drive. 5 years of nothing, and now this. The doctors had never said impossible, just unlikely. I had prayed so long and so hard and so faithfully that I had forgotten to be afraid of the answer. I had been asking God for a child for 5 years, and God had apparently been waiting for the worst possible moment to say yes. I was pregnant. And the timing, the terrible, irreversible timing, meant there was only one question that mattered. A question I could not answer. A question that sat at the center of everything like a stone in still water, sending consequences outward in every direction, touching everything. Whose child was this? I drove home. I walked upstairs. I sat on the bathroom floor because my legs had decided they were finished carrying me, and the bathroom floor was where I had landed. The bracelet was still on my wrist. I stared at the pregnancy test, and I would not look at the bracelet, and outside the traffic continued, and somewhere in this city, Peter was rebuilding his business, and somewhere else, Harry was holding his documents and his patience and his delusion, and none of them knew what I now knew. The secret had a heartbeat, and it did not belong to my husband.
I almost did not go to that gathering. Something in my body knew. The way your body sometimes sends a warning your mind is too exhausted to decode, a heaviness in the chest, a reluctance with no logical name, the feeling of walking towards something you cannot stop and cannot survive unchanged. I stood at the mirror getting dressed and thought about calling to say I was unwell. That would not have been a lie. Something made me go anyway. I think I was tired of running from rooms. I think some part of me understood that the running was over. It was a Sunday. Family. The kind of gathering where everyone performs warmth and the food is plentiful and the conversations stay safely on the surface because everyone knows that in every family, beneath the laughter and the passed plates and the familiar stories told for the 100th time, there are fault lines that nobody wants to be standing on when the ground moves. In the corner of that room, barely visible from where I stood, sat Uncle Femi, the eldest of Peter's family. A man who spoke rarely at gatherings and was listened to completely when he did. A man whose presence at any family occasion carried the weight of the entire lineage, its history, its expectations, its judgment. He had a way of sitting in rooms that made you aware of him without ever demanding your attention. He was simply there, the way mountains are simply there, and everything that happened in his vicinity happened in the awareness of his witness. I noticed him. Then I noticed Harry arriving 20 minutes after us, and I stopped noticing anything else. I felt Harry before I saw him, that specific shift in my nervous system that his presence had been triggering for months. A cold, clarifying alertness, the feeling of a prey animal whose body has registered a predator before the eyes have confirmed it. I watched him from across the room. He greeted people, shook hands, laughed at something an uncle said. He was very good at rooms, he always had been. Then he found me with his eyes across that crowded space with the calm precision of a man who had already decided what was going to happen today, and he began to work his way toward Peter. Slowly, deliberately, letting me watch, letting me understand what was coming, and giving me just enough time to feel completely powerless to stop it. He leaned close to Peter and said something I could not hear, and Peter's face did something I had never seen it do. It went completely still. Not surprised, not confused, confirmed. In the way a face goes confirmed when something you have suspected and dreaded and prepared yourself for has finally arrived and is no longer in the realm of fear, but in the realm of fact. Peter looked across the room and found me, and in the 3 seconds of eye contact that followed, I understood with total clarity that my husband had not been rebuilding these past months. He had been reconstructing, carefully, quietly, around a wound he had been tending in private, in the dark, while I believed I was the only one in this marriage carrying something unbearable. He crossed the room. He took my arm gently. The gentleness was the most devastating thing. "Come outside with me," he said.
We stood in the garden while the sounds of the gathering continued behind us, absurdly, insultingly normal. Plates clinking, someone laughing at something, the world entirely indifferent to what was happening in that small patch of quiet between two people whose marriage was about to finish becoming what it had already been for a long time. "I know about Harry," Peter said. No preamble, no accusation in his voice, just the flat, exhausted geography of a man who has been living with the truth for a long time and is finally, carefully setting it down somewhere outside himself. "I hired someone 3 months ago. I know about the money. I know what it cost you." The ground opened beneath me. "Peter, I need you to tell me one thing." His voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, just enough to show me the fault line running through all that controlled quiet. "Is there anything else I don't know?" The truth does not care how long you have been hiding it. It surfaces on its own schedule, in its own time, by its own logic, and no amount of careful silence or practiced lying or locked drawers can negotiate with the timing it chooses for itself. Mine surfaced in that garden with the sound of family 20 feet away. "I'm pregnant," I said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Peter did not move, did not speak. A muscle worked in his jaw. His eyes went somewhere inward, to some place he'd been visiting in private, in preparation for the worst, and was now discovering that the worst was a room with more walls than he had anticipated. The timing, I said, because I owed him the complete architecture of it. I don't know. I can't be certain. It could be. Mine, he said quietly. Or his. Yes. Longer silence, deeper, the kind of silence that has a shape to it. And then Peter did something I was not prepared for. He sat down on the garden step, this man who had been standing so carefully, holding himself together through sheer disciplined will, and he sat down and put his face in his hands. And from behind those hands, barely above a whisper, he said, "It can't be mine." I heard the words, but my mind refused them. Peter. I've known since before we got married. Still behind his hands, still barely audible. The doctors told me. I couldn't tell you. I was afraid you would leave, so I let you pray. I let you hope every month. I told myself maybe they were wrong. I told myself God could change things. He lowered his hands and looked at me, and his eyes were the most devastated thing I have ever seen. I let you carry 5 years of grief for something I already knew the answer to. I let you walk into all of this carrying a wound I had already given you and pretended I didn't know was there. The world stopped. Not dramatically, not with a sound, just stopped. The way the world stops when a truth arrives that is large enough to reorder everything around it. Every secret in our marriage was on that garden step between us, his and mine, all of it exposed and irreversible and costing us everything simultaneously, the bitter, complete harvest of two people who loved each other so carefully and so dishonestly that they had destroyed the very thing they were trying to protect. He had kept his silence to hold me. I had kept mine to save him, and the silence between us had grown into something that had consumed us both from the inside, quietly, over 5 years, until there was nothing left of the marriage but the performance of it. We had both been drowning. We had both watched the other struggle and said nothing about the water. It was in that moment, that precise moment of shared terrible recognition, that the door behind us opened. Harry stepped into the garden. He had the composure of a man who has arrived to detonate something and is already calculating the aftermath. He looked at Peter, then at me, then at the space between us, the step, the sat-down man, the woman standing above him with nothing left to hide, and something shifted in his face. From the shadows at the edge of the garden, Uncle Femi stepped forward. He had been there the whole time, still, silent, witnessing, the way elders witness, not intruding, but present, the living embodiment of the family's memory and moral weight. He looked at Harry with the particular quality of disappointment that only an elder can deliver. Not anger, not drama, but the slow, devastating reckoning of someone who has watched a person since childhood and now seen clearly what that person is. Harry opened his mouth. Uncle Femi said, quietly but with the full authority of every year he had lived, "He who digs a pit for others will one day measure its depth with his own body." He did not say anything else. He did not need to. He turned and walked back inside, and Harry, for the first time since my wedding day, had nothing to say.
The weeks that followed were the slowest of my life. Not because nothing happened, because everything happened in that quiet, irreversible way that truly consequential things tend to. No screaming, no dramatic confrontations, just the steady, merciless machinery of consequence moving through every corner of our lives like water through cracked stone. Harry's unraveled first. I will not pretend I felt nothing watching it, but what I felt was not triumph. It was the hollow recognition of someone watching a storm move on after it had already taken the roof. The damage was done. The storm continuing elsewhere was not relief. It was just continuation. The elder who had embraced Harry at every family gathering for 15 years looked at his outstretched hand at the next occasion and turned his back without a word. No explanation, no scene, just the turned back and the devastating social arithmetic of a community that had arrived at its verdict and did not require a public announcement to enforce it. A woman who used to call his name in greeting crossed to the other side of the street. A business associate returned a long-awaited call with a single line, "I can't continue this arrangement." 9 seconds. Harry had built a significant portion of his life on the goodwill of people who, it turned out, had been paying attention the whole time. They had simply waited until they were certain before they acted. The forged documents, the insurance fraud papers, the financial records designed to destroy Peter never went anywhere because Peter had known. Peter had hired people, and everything Harry had assembled had already been quietly, methodically, surgically dismantled before Harry ever had the chance to use it. Harry had spent years building a trap, and the man he thought was broken had been building a counter the whole time.
Peter and I tried. I need you to know that. We did not surrender immediately or easily or without genuine cost. We sat in rooms together and said true things to each other for the first time in our marriage. His secret, mine, all of it on the table with nothing left to protect or explain or carefully manage. It was the most honest we had ever been. It was not enough. Not because the love was gone, and this was the part that broke me in a way that betrayal itself had not. The love did not go. It was still there, recognizable, real, the same love that had been in his eyes at the altar and in that dark kitchen with the plate of food. Still there, undiminished, just unable to survive what the silence had built around it. We had loved each other so carefully that we had been dishonest. We had protected each other so devotedly that we had withheld the truths the other person needed to live a real life. We had been so afraid of losing each other that we had made the losing inevitable, slowly, quietly, one careful silence at a time. The marriage ended, not with a door slamming, but with a door closing softly, the sound of two people who still loved each other, choosing to stop causing damage. Peter left on a Tuesday. He packed one bag, which told me he would be back for the rest, which told me he had thought about this moment longer and more carefully than I had known. At the door, he turned and looked at me, that same quality of attention, that same man under all the wreckage, unchanged in the ways that mattered and permanently altered in the ways that also mattered. And he said, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth from the beginning. You deserved better than what I gave you." I said, "So did you." He nodded once. And then he was gone. I stood at the window and watched him walk to his car, and I thought about the man at the altar pressing his fist against his mouth. I thought about the dark kitchen and the plate of food and the choosing to stay. I thought about 5 years of praying for a child and a man who knew the whole time that the prayer was aimed at an impossibility he had created and kept silent because the love was real, even when the honesty was not. I do not know where Peter is now. I hope he found something honest to build on. I hope he told the next person the truth from the beginning. I hope I taught him something, even if only through the damage we did to each other. I hope the man who sat in the dark beside me without asking me to speak is somewhere in the world finding the peace our silence stole from both of us. I hope.
I kept the baby. There was never a real moment of deliberation. This child had not chosen any of this. This child arrived without an agenda, without calculation, without a secret underneath it. The only participant in this entire story who came into it clean. She was the only honest thing left. I gave her my name. Not Peter's, not Harry's, mine. I stood in the registry office and wrote it down and felt the full weight of what that decision meant. Not resolution, not the clean ending of a lesson learned, but a kind of terrifying clarity. A line drawn in the only ink I had left. But I will not soften what that cost. This child will grow up in the space where a brotherhood used to be.
She will never know the friendship that Peter and Harry once shared, the history of two men who grew from boys together, who knew each other's families and fears and old jokes, who were woven into each other's lives so completely that their unraveling left permanent damage in the fabric of everyone connected to them. That bond is not broken. It is poisoned. Poisoned for this generation and the next, because she will carry the story in her blood without ever having chosen it. She inherits the fracture, not the warmth. The lineage that should have continued, the brotherly bond that should have become uncles and godparents and cousins, and the particular richness of a child raised inside a full and intact community of love, all of it is mud now. The rain came and drenched the soil, and what was planted there did not survive it. That is what too late means. Not death, the death of something that could have been beautiful. I don't know yet if giving her my name was mercy or the beginning of a new kind of sorrow. Some mornings I look at her face, this entirely new face that arrived from the wreckage of everything, and I feel something I do not have a word for. Not peace, not happiness exactly, something quieter. The specific quality of standing on the other side of the worst thing you have survived and discovering that you are still standing. She does not know what she came from. One day she will. And when that day comes, I will tell her everything. Not the version that makes me look better, not the version that assigns all the guilt cleanly to people who are not present to defend themselves, not the version edited for a child's comfort, the true version, the one where her mother made a choice that could not be taken back, the one where her father hid a secret that cost both of them 5 years of grief, the one where a man she will never have to call anything waited his entire adult life for an opportunity and built an architecture of harm to reach it. The whole true story. Because the one thing this entire chapter of my life taught me, the one thing I would carve into the wall of every room I ever stood in, the one gift I can give this child that costs me everything and is worth every cent of it, is that truth, no matter how much it costs, is always cheaper than the secret. Always. The storm does not choose who it hits. It does not look at you and weigh your intentions or measure how hard you tried or account for the love underneath the damage. It does not distinguish between the woman who sacrificed herself to save her husband and the man who engineered that sacrifice for his own ends, and the husband who held a secret that started the whole unraveling. It does not spare the child who had no part in any of it. It just hits. And when it passes, you are left standing in what remains, taking inventory of what was lost, learning the shape of what is gone, deciding what kind of person you are going to be in the silence after. I am tired. I will not pretend otherwise. The kind of tired that sleep does not fix, that lives in the bones, in the places where the weight was carried longest. I am marked in ways that will not fully fade. I am standing in the middle of consequences that will continue unfolding for years, for my daughter's years, in ways I cannot yet predict or prepare for. But I am standing. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, the whole story. A woman who went into the dark to save the man she loved, who got lost in the dark, who made decisions she cannot take back, who paid prices she did not know she was agreeing to, and who came out the other side, not clean, not healed, not arrived at some clear and comfortable wisdom, but standing, upright, carrying the truth instead of burying it, giving her daughter her name and her honesty and the only inheritance worth passing on. I did not lose everything. I lost the life I was pretending to live. And sometimes, not always, not painlessly, not without cost that you will feel in every quiet moment for years, but sometimes that is the only way to find your way to the real one. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the secrets we keep to protect the people we love, about the silence we choose and the silence that is chosen for us, about what it costs to love someone too carefully and not honestly enough, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel and comment below. Was Melody wrong to keep the secret? Was Peter wrong to keep his? Because I have my answer. I want to hear yours.